the problem is that like I'm in Tuscaloosa, right? I mean, it's like, it's not exactly the television production hotbed of the world. So I'm in a hotel room, you know what I mean? Director Trisha and I were dealing with this while you two were, just whatever, joking around about the NBA and bragging about Remy's bathroom skills. You know what I mean? Like, I'm over here trying to figure out, the best possible shot given the situation we're all in.
Fantasy Football Happy Hour with Matthew Berry, served by Applebee's.
Welcome to the Fantasy Football Happy Hour. I'm Connor Rogers alongside Jay Croucher, and we will be joined by the incredible Denny Carter. No Matthew Berry today, Jay. There's Denny, by the way. Matthew is still in the media hotbed that is Tuscaloosa, Alabama. I guess him and Trisha couldn't find a solution.
Upgrade today for mine. Bring in Mr. Carter. It's good to see you, Denny.
Yes.
Hey, you said it. And I'm not in a hotel room, and I don't have any issues. So maybe you're right, Jay.
Matthew is helping his son move into college. Full transparency. We didn't completely lose his sweet production setup that he had yesterday. But, Denny, it's always good to have you on the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Watched the game last night. I had some good takeaways for fantasy, I think. We're going to get into that, and looking forward to a weekend of more grinding small sample sizes in preseason games, because that's what we do this time of year.
That is exactly what we do. We got our preseason risers and fallers. That's news-based, right? There's only so much we can take away from these games. So our risers and fallers, that's mostly news-based. We'll talk Rashee Rice, J.K. Dobbins, that Bengals backfield, a couple of rookie wide receivers. And then, of course, we'll get into the preseason action between the Patriots and the Eagles, because we might have a quarterback competition on hand for the rest of summer with Drake Maye and Jacoby Brissett. So let's jump right into the biggest preseason risers. This is the news that we're at least considering buying into. And, Jay, we start with Rashee Rice because we have no clarity on the timing of suspension. Something you talk a lot about on this show is that these things can tend to drag out with the NFL. Hollywood Brown is injured. This is Patrick Mahomes' passing offense, by the way. So Rashee Rice is basically the guy right now.
Yeah, and I think there's just the natural inclination when you go into a draft and there's like a potential suspension looming over a player. You just don't want to deal with that situation. They've got the check mark next to their name when you're trying to draft them. It's just annoying, but there's a lot of opportunity in that. And I think there's been this assumption for a long time that Rashee Rice is like definitely going to get suspended. Well, he's not. We don't know what is going to happen, but the upside here is that, he was excellent in his first season. I think he delivered and more on expectations. He was wide receiver 8 on a points per game basis over his final 6 games. Really seemed to establish that rapport with Mahomes. Mahomes trusted him in the playoffs as well. And so there are worlds where now Rashee Rice, he's going to be wide receiver 1 for Patrick Mahomes. And is that going to look like, Tyreek Hill a few years ago? Perhaps not, but it's going to look better, I think, than the version of Rice that we saw last year for sure.
Right, if it's 70% of what we saw with Tyreek Hill, that's amazing for fantasy value. And Denny, to the stretch Jay's talking about from weeks 12 to 18, this is a guy that had over a 27% target share, obviously in an offense that we all want a piece of. So it helps you buy into Rashee Rice even more, right?
Right, and this is a Kansas City Chiefs offense that passes in the red zone more than anyone, traditionally with Mahomes under center. So lots of opportunities for touchdown receptions. Obviously, we've seen that with Travis Kelce. We've seen that with Jerick McKinnon and other running backs catching passes from Mahomes. I think we can see that from a wide receiver like Rashee Rice, who has the kind of size and the kind of profile who can succeed inside the 20 and especially inside the 10. I also think the Marquise Brown injury plays into this. I think that, Rashee Rice, the suspension issue, his off-season issues, I think that's going to suppress his ADP to the point where he is a clear value, no matter how you're building your roster, whether you're taking receivers early or in the middle or late or whatever. I think you need to focus on where Rice is going because he has every chance to be a wide receiver 2 in fantasy.
Another wide receiver that, Jay, feels like this is your absolute value guy, that's Cooper Kupp right now, who, listen, the camp reports have been great. Puka Nacua, unfortunately, dealing with a week-to-week knee injury right now. And you simply think that Kupp's ADP is almost insane at this point for how low it is.
Yeah, some places Kupp is going almost 50th in fantasy drafts, which to me is crazy, where his past 3 years, so last year he dealt with the injuries, an array of injuries, and the emergence of Puka Nacua. And as soon as it seemed like Kupp was getting back into it, he would get a knock and then he would fade out. But the 2 years prior to that, each year he was first among wide receivers in fantasy points per game. And I just think that the Triple Crown guy of 2021, who had, arguably the greatest wide receiver season in history. By the way, Cooper Kupp's had one of the strangest careers of anyone that you'll ever see. Like this guy, we're going to look back in like 25 years and be like, what happened to Cooper Kupp in 2021? Wasn't he just like a slot guy? But I just think that guy from that season, we can't rule out that he is completely gone. Now, I'm not expecting 1,900 receiving yards and 16 touchdowns, but there is this idea, I think, that Kupp is definitely on the other side, and I just think there's upside here, and people focus on his age. He's 9 months older than Tyreek Hill, and everyone's fine taking Tyreek Hill as a top 1, top 2 wide receiver. I just think it's gone a little bit too far on Kupp. Everything out of camp, like you said, Connor, has been very positive. Jeremy Fowler reported that Kupp is the wide receiver 1 at Rams camp, not Puka Nacua. And for all of Kupp's injury concerns, Puka Nacua plays football in an incredibly violent fashion. He is also an injury risk, and there are worlds where Kupp is clearly the guy for Stafford.
Denny, when you look at how effective Kupp is on a points per game basis, but you are going to bake in that you're getting him at a value because of the injury risk, how does that impact your draft strategy with him? Is wide receiver a deep enough position that you go, listen, I'm going to target Cooper Kupp in that 40 to 55 range, and I'm going to backfill it at some point in the draft with reliable depth just because I like where this position is this year, or is there too much risk in that strategy?
I mean, I like where your head is at, Connor, on that. I think that Kupp can be a top 12 receiver in fantasy conservatively if he stays healthy. And that is, of course, the issue. On the Rotoworld football show, Pat Daugherty and I talked to a Rams beat writer a couple weeks ago who really couldn't say who was the 1A and who was the 1B between Kupp and Puka Nacua. I think that uncertainty should be factored into how we're drafting Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. They're both, have some, like Jay just said, have some injury history. That scares me a little bit. But you can get Kupp sometimes, depending on how you draft your team, as your wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3. That seems ridiculous to me. I'm doing that every time.
Yeah, I think the thing too with Kupp is that even if he is 31, he's not a guy who depends on elite athleticism. He's just, and as someone who lost a lot of money going against Cooper Kupp in 2021, which is a lot of tape on Cooper Kupp, and just the way that he gets open, the way that he blocks, the way that he understands the gaps and the spaces. He's kind of like the Travis Kelce tight endish elements to his game at wide receiver, where I just think that this guy, if he gets more receptions down the field, and that's what really hurt him last year, he wasn't getting the deep ball threats as much, whereas that was a part of his game in 2021. I just think the sky's the limit. And just the idea that Tyreek Hill can be wide receiver 1 and Kupp can be wide receiver 22, Kupp's outperformed him on a per game basis 2 of the past 3 years, and they're basically the same age. I would take Tyreek over Kupp, but that gap is just way too big for me.
Let's jump into the running back situation in Cincinnati here, guys. Coming into, really coming out of the spring, it felt like Zack Moss, Chase Brown going into year 2 with a ton of talent. A lot of the reports have been that Chase Brown has been getting significant run with the first team offense. Now, Denny, this kind of makes sense because in theory, you'd want to see the guy that's younger, has more explosive playmaking ability, but at the end of the day is a little bit of an unknown. How do we view this Bengals backfield at this point of the summer where, to be fair to Zack Moss, when he had to play for Jonathan Taylor, he looked really, really good, but the unknown of Chase Brown in an offense that has a lot of talent has to be enticing?
He is, yes, and you make a good point. He is largely still an unknown. I mean, he had one really explosive catch and run last year with Jake Browning under center for Cincinnati. That was cool. It really boosted his metrics across the board. But a closer look, and I actually wrote a piece on Rotoworld recently where I looked at the metrics of Zack Moss versus Chase Brown, and Moss has the edge on a lot of those, as a rusher and a pass catcher. So I'm not completely writing off Zack Moss as a guy who simply cannot be the RB1 in an explosive, high-scoring Bengals offense that throws a lot to the running back. This is something Joe Burrow has done with Joe Mixon in the past. I definitely want the prize of the RB1 for the Bengals. And if Chase Brown keeps climbing in ADP and Zack Moss keeps dropping, and Moss is a little banged up, I will say, I'm trending toward Moss at the moment.
Jay, this is an offense that, with Joe Mixon out the door to Houston, that vacates 309 touches. Is there a world where maybe both of them are just a factor in this, or do you think eventually it does lean to one guy as this offense has been in the past?
Yeah, I think this is like the higher variance version of what's going on in Tennessee, where Tennessee seems very clear that it's like, all right, 50% Tony Pollard, 50% Tyjae Spears or something around that. I think this could develop into that, but there is more variance where it seems like one guy could really take the job. I think Brown is your higher upside play, but Moss is perhaps the higher floor play. But I mean, Connor, do you think that Chase Brown, are there worlds where he can become a 3-down workhorse-ish back?
The last year at Illinois, I mean, he had a massive workload and showed that he can handle that. So I do believe that. It's just a matter if that's what they want this offense to be with Mixon out the door. Are they going to lean on one guy? But in terms of can he do it, he absolutely can do it. And, you know, Denny kind of hinted at this. Zach Moss is a guy as well that has dealt with injuries throughout his career and is already a little banged up this summer. So you just wonder, is this a battle of attrition? Is it just who can stay healthy? And one more thing on this conversation, Denny, is this should be, in theory, a pass-heavy offense because they have so much talent at wide receiver. They've added talent to the offensive tackle position to hopefully keep Joe Burrow healthy. How do you factor that in with the value of both these running backs?
Yeah, you're right. And, you know, we thought that the Bengals offense might change with Joe Burrow out last season for a stretch, but it didn't. They were still among the 2 or 3 pass heaviest teams every single week, no matter the opponent, no matter the game script. And I think that that is telling about how this team wants to operate, especially with Burrow back. It probably means not a ton of rushing opportunity for these guys, for these backs, but it means a lot of pass route running, and it potentially means a lot of targets. And in PPR, to get a cheap back, you know, in the middle of your draft or even the back half of your draft, who's catching passes from Joe Burrow, that's awesome. Like it's hard to top that in the back half of your draft.
Yeah, I just think my concern with Zach Moss is that he kind of was a non-entity for most of his career, and then he wound up in the Shane Steichen offense. And I think Steichen is a top 2-3 play caller in the NFL.
I would agree.
And the fact that he only really emerged as a guy in that offense while Jonathan Taylor was out, with an offensive line, by the way, in Indianapolis that was playing really well. It's just a little bit of a concern for me just about the talent level, whereas with Chase Brown, at least there's the unknown that maybe he is, you know, at a level above someone like Zach Moss, who seems pretty stable in what we think of him as.
Another intriguing backfield, guys, has to be the Chargers. Greg Roman hired as the offensive coordinator. His offenses have ranked top 3 in rushing attempts in 7 of his 10 seasons as offensive coordinator, which of course has a trickle effect on the flyer they took on J.K. Dobbins. Obviously a promising talent. He hasn't been able to stay healthy throughout his career. He tore his Achilles in week 1 of last season. But if you listen to Dobbins so far this summer, he sounds pretty excited about what he can do with more opportunity and health.
It's just teaching me something. And I do think that the storm is over for that. Now I'm on a new journey, a healthy journey this year. And you guys will see it'll be special because I've been saying it the whole time. You'll be like, damn, he's been saying that the whole time. Like, that's over, it's over, it's over. And now it is finally over, and now you guys will be able to see. If I get the volume, I do think I'll be one of the best in the league, you know? And I've showed that with, I think, do you know how much yards I average a carry? Because I don't.
I think it's 5.8.
5.8? Okay. I don't know many backs that got that.
And that's why today J.K. Dobbins drinks for free here at the Happy Hour Bar. A cheers to a healthy J.K. Dobbins. And, Jay, this is someone who has familiarity with Greg Roman. During his rookie season in 2020, 925 scrimmage yards, 9 touchdowns, most importantly, 6 yards per carry. You heard Dobbins talking about his career 5.8 yards per carry. Just hasn't really been healthy since then. But this is a team that wants to run the ball. We think the offense is going to be better, and not only that, but run heavy. I mean, can we really convince ourselves again of, hey, I'll take another flyer on J.K. Dobbins and see what happens here?
I think that is all it can be, is a flyer, just with the array of maladies that he's dealt with. At this point, you have to believe that not only is it a heightened re-injury risk, but it just may have sapped some of his explosiveness, even if the viral Twitter videos may suggest otherwise. But look, I think that between Roman, between Harbaugh, between having Rashawn Slater and Joe out as the best tackle tandem that franchise has had in, 20 years, however long, a long time. There is upside for J.K. Dobbins, but I think that, Edwards is probably still going to get some goal line work, and you suspect that he is going to be somewhat limited in terms of just the amount of carries that he can get just because of his injury history.
Yeah, Denny, is this a situation where, the Gus bus just kind of takes over, or is the potential talent of Dobbins a big factor? Especially it feels like there was once upon a time we were hearing Kamani Vidal, the day 3 rookie, in the mix at some point. I don't know if that's going to carry over into the regular season.
Yeah, us fantasy nerds may have gotten a little carried away with Kamani Vidal.
No way.
I will say, just a little bit, and now we're all in financial trouble. But like Dobbins, first of all, a guy you root for big time. I mean, watching that clip, it's incredible to think what he's been through, and maybe he can come out the other side in an offense that he has a lot of familiarity with, and an offense like you guys said that wants to be run first, wants to be run heavy. There's no way this team is going to be balanced or pass heavy. I've heard that sort of, talked about a little bit online. I just don't see it. Okay. So they are going to run the ball a lot. Dobbins is going at a reasonable ADP, RB 42-ish right now, around Trey Benson, Jerome Ford, Chuba Hubbard, Rico Dowdle. Honestly, I think his path, Dobbins' path to upside and to fantasy relevance is clearer than those guys, and I think that he can be a plug and play type guy. Now, if you start your draft with an elite running back or two, you're probably not going to, be very interested in a Dobbins late in the draft. If you're like me and you're desperate for running back touches later in the draft, Dobbins looks pretty darn good.
Denny, so when you say that, is this a situation that, say you do just steer clear of running back early, do you have to take Dobbins and Gus Edwards and say, okay, I think this thing will sort itself out? Mm-hmm. Or do you kind of throw darts around the board and Dobbins has the upside dart where it feels like the Gus bus is a little bit more of a red zone floor guy?
It's a good question. And honestly, I try not to pack my bench with guys from the same backfield. It sort of limits your team's upside. If I have to choose between Dobbins and Gus Edwards, right now, I'm leaning toward Dobbins, even though you're right. I mean, Gus Edwards is traditionally a goal line back, a successful one in Baltimore. Who knows if that, holds up without the threat of Lamar Jackson at the goal line, scaring teams into just letting Gus walk into the end zone. I don't know. But yeah, I think you need to choose one or the other. Right now, I'm choosing Dobbins.
All right, let's close this out with our risers. Jalen McMillan, a third-round rookie out of Washington. It's amazing when you look at that Washington offense, the amount of talent they had in the top 100. It almost makes you forget about the third wide receiver taken from that group in Jalen McMillan. But he's reminded everybody, Jay, of the type of player he is, having a great camp with the Bucs. We know the household names, Mike Evans, of course, Chris Godwin, who we think they'd like to keep in the slot. But this is a team where Trey Palmer, as their third wide receiver last year, had a 65% snap rate, and it feels like McMillan is there to take that job.
Yeah, I guess the concern would be that even though Trey Palmer did get on the field, he had 385 receiving yards, and he stayed healthy the whole season. This was last year at least, and it's a new offensive coordinator, but last year it was just the offense was so geared to Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. Mike Evans isn't going anywhere. He's still going to be the number one guy. And the other thing with Chris Godwin, he's only 28 years old. Feels like he's 50. Feels like he's been in the NFL forever.
His body might be closer to 50.
And so I think that he's going to shift more into the slot, and maybe McMillan gets more play outside. This team was about a neutral pass rate last year, so it's not like they chuck it a ton. They probably ran the ball too much, really, given that they weren't getting anything on the ground with Rachaad White. So I think, Connor, it's mainly just the question of talent and how much is he going to force himself onto the field.
Well, what you brought up is the key of why I'm not buying into rookie Jalen McMillan. I think the long term for the Bucs makes a lot of sense, but I think projecting him forward, his best position was the slot. Play strength was a question, and I know he was banged up last year, but there was a reason that Rome Odunze went in the top 10, and then Jalen Polk went in the top 35, and then McMillan went just before the top 100 concluded in the draft, because he was clearly the third best receiver in that Michael Penix-led offense. With McMillan, his agility, once again, the lack of play strength, he's made for the slot, but the Bucs want to keep Chris Godwin in the slot, which makes sense. So it feels like down the road, when Godwin is no longer with the Bucs, okay, I could buy into McMillan, but if you're putting him on the outside, I don't think the actual volume and production as a rookie is going to – and this is so you said this, so dominated by Mike Evans. It's so dominated by Rachaad White and Chris Godwin that, Denny, it's great that McMillan's having a good camp and he has a key future with the Bucs, but we are talking about fantasy football, and I don't know if this is an offense where that type of receiver is going to be elevated this year.
Yeah, I mean, look, when you talk about Evans and Godwin, you're talking about 50% of the targets basically in the Bucs offense. And then you have Rachaad White, and then you have Cade Otton. Okay, let's not forget about Cade Otton, us tight end sickos, late round sickos. We love our Cade Otton. And so I don't know. I just don't know where the targets are going to come from for whoever is the wide receiver 3 in this Tampa offense. I think McMillan makes sense if you're in, like a 14-team league with multiple flex spots where you're happy to, plug in a guy later in the season who's going to see maybe 4 or 5 targets in a game. Hopefully he scores a touchdown. Hopefully he hits a big one. But beyond that, I think that you're focusing on obviously Evans, Godwin, and Rachaad White. Everybody else is just sort of, on the sideline as far as fantasy goes in this Tampa offense.
That's a great point, Denny. If Godwin gets hurt, which we've seen him banged up over the years, then McMillan as a waiver wire option is somebody we'll be talking about because, once again, then I think he kicks inside, and that's where you want to see him in this offense, and you're talking about him being the number 2 wide receiver, not maybe the 4th or 5th guy in terms of targets. At a position, that's going to be an adjustment. The Rotoworld Draft Guide is here for you during the peak of draft season, and this year it has added features available exclusively through a new partnership with Matthew Berry's Fantasy Life. Get a Fantasy Life Plus subscription and receive the Rotoworld Draft Guide to help you crush your competition. Use promo code ROTO10 for 10% off and unlock extensive fantasy DFS and betting tools now. Go to NBCSports.com/fantasylife to learn more. All right, fellas, we did the risers. Let's jump into the preseason fallers, the news we're buying. We're not writing off anyone's NFL career just yet. And Jay, the first guy, Jonathon Brooks, simply just because he's not ready. He got hurt, pretty late in his college season last year, season-ending injury. Won't play in the preseason. He's expected back around week 3 to 4. But maybe at the end of the day, this actually creates some value for him where if he was ready to start the season, he'd probably be overdrafted. Yeah,
and it was kind of Dave Canales to refreshingly give a specific timeline where he said, week 3 or 4, which you don't typically get, which was nice. And I think also nice for Jonathon Brooks is that the Bucs last year, they just ran the ball too much under Dave Canales, and Rachaad White was second in the NFL in carries. Now, this shouldn't have happened. He wasn't getting anything. He was getting 3.6 yards per carry. Yeah, he had the same amount of carries as Christian McCaffrey. Christian McCaffrey was 5.4 yards per carry, and Rachaad White 3.6. So I think that Dave Canales, he is obsessed, perhaps to a fault, with the idea of establishing the run to help out his quarterback and to create the passing plays in there. And clearly Brooks goes into a backfield that is not particularly intimidating. Chuba Hubbard is fine. Miles Sanders is trending down naturally. So I think that there is a wealth of opportunity. He was a second-round pick for a reason, Connor, but what do you think that his usage is going to look like when he's back?
The pass game, and that's why I'm excited about his return. I think even at times when you watched him at Texas, you'd like to see him get in space even more on screens, dump off, swing passes, angle routes, and I think Canales is almost tailor-made when you look at Rachaad White's usage where you go, okay, they want to protect their young quarterback, they want to throw to the running back. So I think that's where Brooks' usage is going to be, that in November, he feels like a guy that in a way could be a bit of a PPR merchant that I would be excited about. And Denny, I'll throw it to you like this. And we showed that backfield, Chuba Hubbard, Miles Sanders. Is this even a backfield worth streaming while you're waiting for Brooks, or do you just ignore it entirely until he's back?
Listen, Chuba Hubbard, it's not pretty, folks, but he gets it done. Okay, it's 3 yards in a cloud of dust. But coaches seem to really be into Chuba Hubbard for some reason. The Panthers offense always ends up, let's just give it to Chuba Hubbard. So I think that he will have early season fantasy value, especially in deeper formats. I am taking him here and there, I will admit. So Brooks, I agree with you, Connor, in that I think that he does. What did you say?
You were reluctant to admit that, but I'm glad how honest you are.
I did. Yeah, I know. I have to be honest with the folks, okay? But Brooks has some late season intrigue, okay? Like, when he comes back in October, most likely, maybe he gets a ramp up period. And then by the end of October, early November, he gets the lead back role and gets those valuable targets, underneath and whatever. He becomes a PPR cheat code of sorts. But the thing is, he's going at RB28, and that's around Jalen Warren. That's around Najee Harris. That's around Zach Moss and Javonte Williams. Like, for me, I can't take Brooks there. Like, I'm taking those other guys. I feel like if he drops, to be, RB32, RB35, maybe I'll have some interest. But right now, I think it's a little too rich.
Yeah, I think the thing too that we have to keep in mind with everything Panthers related this season is that whole season, that whole organization this year is geared towards one thing, and that's making Bryce Young look good. Because if he doesn't, then everyone loses their jobs. Yeah. And that is all that is going to matter. And I think that in terms of how that affects Jonathon Brooks. I think that they are going to be doing, I think Canales is going to be doing what he did with Baker Mayfield last year, where he's running to put Mayfield in better situations. I think there's going to be a lot of dump offs for Bryce Young. There's going to be a lot of short game, quick game. That's what Bryce Young is good at. And I don't think he's going to be a downfield guy like the way that Mayfield was to Evans last year. So I think there is going to be a lot of, PPR emergency.
We talked about Chase Brown in our risers here, but Zack Moss makes the fallers, Denny. But you brought up his ADP and where he's being drafted amongst running backs, where it actually doesn't seem that crazy compared to if some of the guys around him. I know there's intrigue in the Steelers' backfield, but you brought up, hey, I'm not taking Brooks in that range. So when you look at Matthews' rankings here, running backs 26 through 35, how do you feel about where Moss stands right now, despite us looking at him as a faller because his reps with the first team haven't been where we wanted them to be this summer?
Right, and that could be injury related. Look, Zack Moss, I've been playing this game long enough to know that Zack Moss is a boring back, okay? He has a boring profile. He's, Chase Brown is so much more exciting. We remember the big plays from last season, or I should say the big play. So Zack Moss is sort of forgotten by fantasy managers who they like their highlights, right? Well, I like my highlights too. But Zack Moss just kind of might sneak in there and just become the old reliable back that the Bengals rely on, down the stretch, especially Joe Mixon, never exciting in this offense, okay? Like, he got it done for fantasy. I think that Moss can be that guy if Chase Brown struggles at all this year. So I'm keeping tabs on it. Honestly, though, I would like to see Moss drop a little more, and maybe that happens in the next week or two. We'll see. But if he does, then he'll be on a lot of my teams.
To your point, Denny, I'm not sure anyone has ever gotten more run out of one screen pass against the Indianapolis Colts like Chase Brown did last season. You take that play out, and then all of a sudden his whole profile looks different. But the idea that he is this explosive, big play guy kind of comes from that play. And obviously he has some sort of track record in college as well. But with Zack Moss, what I would focus on is last year, the number 18 running back in fantasy was Jerome Ford, who's not super sexy, not super exciting, but was just out there. And that was after, obviously, Chubb started the season as the starter. And I think with Moss, just by being rock solid, by being in a good offense, by being a guy who could potentially get red zone touches, there is certainly the pathway where I like to play into going up against the really exciting guy, where I think that people will buy into Chase Brown because he does have the upside, but there's every chance that Zack Moss ends up being the guy you want in that backfield. And right now, he's not being drafted particularly high at all. He's going as running back 28 on Yahoo, right next to Nick Chubb, who we have no idea when he's going to be playing football.
Right. All right, let's look at, we'll transition to a few wide receivers here that have been considered fallers and start with Jordan Addison, who it seems like from an injury standpoint, Jay, things are looking much more promising than we initially thought. But you have the potential suspension risk is looming. J.J. McCarthy looked so promising in his preseason debut, and you thought he would take over at some point this season. His season is lost due to injury with the meniscus repair. So, when you look at Jordan Addison, his season is based on, okay, can Sam Darnold be effective in this offense, and can he benefit from playing across from Justin Jefferson?
Yeah, so right now he's going like a wide receiver 41 type of range. I think that's fine. Don't have a huge, strong position on that. Obviously, there is the potential suspension, and then also he's dealing with seemingly a minor injury at the moment. You're a little bit concerned when there is Hawkinson and Jefferson there with a quarterback who I think is going to key on to Justin Jefferson. I think the thing with the J.J. McCarthy injury, it's not so much that it hurts right now. It's just that now all these guys are one snap away from being in the Nick Mullins show. And I watched the Nick Mullins show last year, and it got 0% on the tomato meter. It was a terrible, terrible, terrible watch. And I just don't think that he's got out for this. And I don't think Jaron Hall is either, because I've never seen someone more petrified to play quarterback than Jaron Hall when he had to play the Packers late in the season. So that would be the concern, is that now you really need Sam Darnold to stay healthy, which is a terrifying sentence for a team that has a lot of good players on it and is really dependent on Sam Darnold now.
Denny, how do you look at Addison's ADP as it stands?
Yeah, first of all, I'm not used to this thing where teams use the carts to get guys off the practice field and then say they're fine.
The carts?
Well, what's going on? Well, this happened to Tyrone Tracy a few days ago, where I was, his season's over, and he has a low ankle sprain, and he's running the next day.
He goes off on the cast on him.
Right, and then Addison goes off on the cart. He's fine. He's okay. He's not going to miss any time. So I guess this is just what they do now. We have to adjust our mindset to that. But look, Addison ran really hot on touchdowns last year, especially touchdowns deep, beyond 20 yards. Can he keep that up with Sam Darnold? I'm skeptical, guys. Wide receiver 45, like, he's not going to kill your team, but I don't really see myself targeting Jordan Addison all that often. I will say about Mullins, not good for fantasy and not good to watch. Jay's right about that, but gets it done for Justin Jefferson. Just targets him relentlessly. So I'm not too scared of Jefferson's prospects. Addison, I'm just cool on him for now.
So, Jay, the way we're talking about Jordan Addison, a former first-round pick, and knowing TJ Hawkinson's not going to be ready to start the season, and this kind of goes to something that's been a theme for you since we've returned, it feels like this offense is just tailor-made to just relentlessly pepper Justin Jefferson with targets.
Yeah,
like CD Lamb-style targets almost.
Yeah, and I think the concern is that this idea that, Jefferson's going to face bracket coverage and he's going to get double and triple teamed. It's like 2 years ago when he won Offensive Player of the Year and had one of the great wide receiver seasons of all time. You think they weren't doing that?
Right,
they were doing that every
People caught on.
Yeah. Bill Belichick, I think it was on Thanksgiving, perhaps, when they played the Vikings. And it's like Jefferson's bracketed, Cousins just throwing it to him anyway. He just goes for 100-plus yards because he's Justin Jefferson, and he will beat double teams consistently. So I think Jefferson, and I'd be keen for your take, Denny. Like right now, I would take Justin Jefferson first in drafts. I think that people have just overthought this a little bit too much. I think that in terms of age, in terms of production, in terms of playing in a dome, in terms of target competition, like I would just be taking him straight up over Tyreek Hill, who's on the other side of 30, who plays with a quarterback who falls off every year when it gets colder and later in the season, and also has dealt with injury issues. Jamar Chase has to play the AFC North defenses 6 different times and also plays outdoors. Like I just would be taking Jefferson over these guys.
Yeah, it's going to be probably a bad season for the Vikings, let's just be honest. But it could be a really fun season for Justin Jefferson's fantasy prospects, although I expect him to be very frustrated with how things go in Minnesota. Yeah, I mean, Jefferson has that 180 to 190 target range, with just lots of negative game script for these Vikings. No one really, there to take targets away from him, with Hawkinson coming back from a serious injury and maybe Addison facing a suspension. So I would take Tyreek, although Jay's talk about Tyreek's age is freaking me out right now. Maybe I'm going to rethink that after the show. But I would take Tyreek over Jefferson, but that's about it. And I do think that volume-wise, it could be crazy for Jefferson this season.
All right, guys, let's go to a wide receiver where the conversation is kind of unique. It's not that anything's happened to George Pickens this summer or there's any concerns around the actual player, but Denny, let's live in a world for a second where Brandon Ayuk can be thrusted into this offense that it has some quarterback concerns or question marks at the moment. What would an Ayuk acquisition do for George Pickens from a fantasy perspective?
I try not to get too worked up or overstate this, but really it would be catastrophic for Pickens. I mean,
have to read the card out for him in his fantasy value.
Yeah, more than the air
cast. Be a real card.
There's just no, I don't know. There's no path to serious fantasy changing volume for Pickens if Ayuk comes there. Ayuk, really good target commander. We're talking about an Arthur Smith coached offense with possibly Justin Fields, who, he takes away pass attempts because he takes off and runs, right? And we have to remember that. So if Fields gets the job, if Ayuk gets to Pittsburgh at some point in the next, 5 years, then Pickens, is looking at an 80 target season, maybe 90 targets. And Pickens is the kind of big play wideout who can make a lot from a little. And I do acknowledge that. But from a fantasy standpoint, if you have him as your wide receiver 2 or 3, even 3, I think you're just going to be very frustrated. You're going to really want to bench him at points because of the small outputs, and then he's going to have spike weeks. It's just not a fantasy profile that I'm chasing, guys.
So, Connor, with the Steelers quarterback battle in the Arthur Smith offense, it seemed like it was kind of trending towards Fields a little bit, and then he didn't play particularly well in the preseason game. Now Russ in the market is back to being minus 500 to be the week 1 starter. If you have George Pickens on your fantasy team, do you want Wilson as the quarterback, or do you want Fields?
I would want Russ, honestly. I just think when you look at, this is just my opinion, but I feel like with Fields playing, it just encourages Arthur Smith to be even more run-heavy than ever. And it also opens up a little bit of a different run threat. There's good things about Justin Fields playing for his fantasy potential and for the Steelers as a team because of some of the different run looks you can do. Russell Wilson isn't the same runner he once was, but he is a guy that can get the ball out when it's coached in his head to get the ball out, and you could throw a little bit more with him. And, maybe he gets back to some of those moon shot deep throws, which Pickens absolutely loves. Like, he wants to be in contested catch situations. So I would want Russ if I'm drafting George Pickens and taking the Ayuk part of the equation out the door. And I agree with you, Jay. I just think it's easier to start the season out with Russ and eventually go to a Justin Fields. Denny, it feels a little weird to start out with Fields. And if he's been hurt almost every year of his career, he's had ups and downs. The highs are higher than what Russ brings you now, but then to go to Russ in that scenario.
Yeah, I mean, as far as pass volume goes, I think that you're right, Connor, in that we're going to see more pass volume if and when Russell Wilson starts for the Steelers. How long that lasts, who knows? I mean, I feel like these guys could just be juggled back and forth all season. But it really will change the landscape for the pass catchers in this Pittsburgh offense, including Pickens, including Freiermuth, including maybe Jalen Warren, who looks like the primary pass catching back in that backfield. So I guess I would want Russell Wilson, although my best ball teams would like Justin Fields because we like the rushing. But as far as pass catchers go, it's Russ for sure.
All right, guys, our last wide receiver on our fallers list, rookie Troy Franklin here, Jay, a deep threat. He's played with Bo Nix at Oregon. They had a lot of success, but unfortunately for Franklin, he's a guy that's been struggling in camp so far in a passing offense that at the moment doesn't really inspire a ton of confidence anyway. Besides Courtland Sutton, we know what he could do, but after that, it feels like a big, wide room of different options that could really be almost a committee.
Yeah. So I lived in Denver for a few years. Got a lot of Broncos fan friends, and they're all very confused about everything that's happening in Denver right now. It's like, why is Bo Nix our quarterback? Why did we take him 12th overall? What is his offense going to look like? I'm really excited for Troy Franklin. He just doesn't seem to be part of anything that's going on at the moment. So I think I don't really want any part of that offense outside of maybe Javonte Williams. And I think Courtland Sutton is clearly Peyton's guy, and it clearly preferred him over Jerry Jeudy. But do you think that Franklin's skill set kind of pairs with Bo Nix?
Well, I think there's obviously the built-in chemistry. They had not only the deep threat ability in Oregon's offense, but a lot of screens to Franklin. And I just think that's not going to happen for him out of the gate his rookie season. A guy that needs to get bigger, stronger. It's going to take a little bit more time in Sean Payton's offense, which can take a while to learn for a younger player. So I think that Franklin is not a giant factor his rookie season. And to be fair, he was drafted that way in the NFL draft. This is somebody once upon a time that was looked at as a top 40, top 50 selection. He fell in the draft, and now you're seeing him in camp not really get thrusted into a situation with the ones where things are wide open. So, yes, down the road, him and Bo Nix, there's a connection there, and they'll build on that. But out of the gate where we don't know who the starting quarterback is going to be, we don't know who the other wide receivers are going to be out of the gate, there's too much, variance and question marks here that I would want any shares.
Two questions for you then. One, do you think the connection they had in college will translate to the pros? And then secondly, how does Troy Franklin compare to Marvin Mims?
It's a really good point because they do run the same kind of deeper route tree. Now, I think Franklin's route running was better than he was given credit for. The biggest question with him will be, can he get off the line of scrimmage? A guy that plays, almost like Jalen Hyatt, 172, 175 pounds. I think the play speed is even faster than the time speed. So I think with Franklin, they would have to, preferably keep hands off him, play him in the slot. So if you're not seeing that right away, an effort to do that right away in camp, well, that's a big concern. But the built-in chemistry with Bo Nix is a positive sign. These guys have had a ton of success. They weren't a one-year wonder. Those last 2 years at Oregon, Franklin was one of the best wide receivers in the country. And the timing with Nix, the ability for Nix to push the ball down the field specifically to Franklin, I'd buy into this a little bit more from a dynasty standpoint. But Denny, in a redraft standpoint, this doesn't seem like this one has much of a point. It feels like Mims should be getting those opportunities in year 2 compared to Franklin getting them year 1.
I'm cool to Mims as well. I don't think that Mims is going to see, a 100% route share at all. I think that it'll probably be more toward the 50% range for Mims. I think he'll be somewhat rotational. He'll make some big plays. For fantasy, who knows? Like if you're in a managed league where you have to choose starters every week, Mims is going to be tough. He's going to be tough. He's going to be your least favorite player in the world. Troy Franklin, there was a report that the Broncos had a second-round grade on Franklin, so maybe that will factor in at some point. But beyond Courtland Sutton, I don't think that there's much here. I don't think there's much fantasy juice to squeeze. beyond Sutton. I wouldn't be surprised if Franklin is just a straight backup to Josh Reynolds. Coaches love Josh Reynolds, and he's a reliable veteran receiver. We know Sean Payton likes that sort of player. So I think Franklin should remain on pretty much all waiver wires after the draft.
I think the last thing you touched on, Denny, is very important to remember here is who is leading the charge. And it's a guy in Sean Payton that I know Jaleel McLaughlin had moments last year, but overall he is a coach that's going to lean more on veterans in that situation. We saw this with Marvin Mims last year. I feel like Marvin Mims would, maybe have a chance at a big play, and then his snap count would be significantly low. So I think that kind of tells you the story here as well, Jay, that it's just hard to get invested in the rookie aspect of this offense. It's really hard to get invested in this offense as a whole.
Yeah, and also, think about the conference that they play in and the division that they play in, having to go up against the defenses of the Chiefs. The Raiders now have to be viewed as a very strong defense. The Chargers defense will be better under Harbaugh. Yep. So it just doesn't, the vibes just aren't great in Denver. And I understand, Peyton got his guy or whatever, but, you guys, Bo Nix at 12, it just doesn't make a great deal of sense.
A new Premier League season begins this weekend with a London doubleheader. Saturday, West Ham hosts Aston Villa. Then on Sunday, Chelsea takes on defending champion Manchester City, all on NBC and streaming on Peacock. All right, fellas, let's close out today's show with our Rotoworld Player news. Denny, we could talk the big game last night, Eagles-Patriots, where we saw a million different quarterbacks play. But I think what everybody cares about with this one is the quarterback competition in New England. Jacoby Brissett brought back there as a bridge guy. Drake Maye drafted third overall to be the future of this franchise. Where do you think this one stands? Because, we've had some interesting quotes we've heard from the new coach, and, NBC Boston's Phil Perry has had Gerard Mayo talk about the quarterback competition, that it's not going anywhere. They're not committing to Brissett right now. But we also know when Drake Maye was a prospect, this is a team that wants to break some of his bad habits and not thrust him into an offense where there's significant questions on that offensive line right now.
Yes, and right now I think Brissett still has a good chance to start the season as the Patriots starter, but it's gone from absolutely Brissett is the QB1 going into week 1 to there might be a competition if Drake Maye continues to play well. So I think, hey, another good performance for Maye. He wasn't outstanding against the Eagles. He did have a rushing touchdown, which is cool for fantasy. Jacoby Brissett had a horrible pick in the end zone that the Eagles returned to midfield. So that I think that we're starting to see it turn around. It really is on a team that's not going to win like the Patriots. It is a matter of time until Drake Maye gets the starting job. And really, guys, this changes everything for the pass catchers, for the running backs in this offense. Because Jacoby Brissett, he is a statue, okay? My guy is not running at all. He's not taking off. He's dumping it off to running backs. He's dumping it off to tight ends, to short area guys from the slot. Maye is running. Maye is throwing deep, okay? He's being more aggressive. This changes the dynamic for everybody in this offense. So we have to keep that in mind when we're drafting Patriots players. I think that Maye's involvement as a rusher, inside the 5 or inside the 10-yard line might be an overall negative for a guy like Ramondre Stevenson, who I like. I like his ADP right now. I'm taking him in some drafts. But I don't love him if Drake Maye takes over. I'd rather have Brissett in there.
The change of tone is a really important point, Denny, of how they've kind of viewed this. Going back to the quote that NBC Sports, Phil Perry, Boston's Phil Perry got, just Mayo on the quarterbacks was, it felt like you said, it was transitioning so much from, no, Brissett's the guy until he's not, and now it's looking like, well, definitely still a competition here. So it just feels like the tone is changing. Jay, from a fantasy perspective, that is really interesting because with Drake Maye, the rushing upside, and we didn't see as much of it as final year of college. We saw more of it 2 years ago where there was a time people thought he could be the number 1 overall pick or number 2 overall pick. That's something that he's going to have to do in this offense because they simply just don't have enough juice and weapons where he could stand back there and just throw every time.
Yeah, I think my preference, probably your preference, Planet Earth's preference is for Drake Maye to get in there.
I'm actually, from a football perspective, I don't prefer it. From a fantasy perspective, I do. Watching their tackle situation last night and what I've heard from people like Phil Perry, who does such a good job for NBC Boston, all the reporters out there in Boston, it's maybe the worst in football. And for a guy that had bad habits mechanically in college and took a lot of hits because he has to do that, I don't know if that's the best football move, but Jay, I agree. From a fantasy perspective, it's not even close. It's Drake Maye.
I just think from an interest perspective
Yes.
as well. I feel like I know
Good
exactly
point.
what
Product.
Jacoby Brissett is going to be. And the other thing with Brissett, I think his reputation was lifted a ton by that year in Cleveland when he was filling in before Deshaun Watson came back. That year in Cleveland, though, he had like one of the best offensive lines in football. He had Nick Chubb in his absolute peak, and he had some receiving options. And I think and a good play caller in Kevin Stefanski.
Absolutely.
So he was set up to succeed, and this is not that situation. You mentioned the offensive line is very bleak, doesn't have skill player weapons to the extent that he did in Cleveland either. So I just think it will be Maye's job at some point. That seems inevitable. I would think it would be week 1, if not for the fact that the Patriots, their first 8 weeks, the schedule is absolutely brutal in terms of just teams and defenses they have to play. They got to play the Jets twice. They got to go at San Francisco, Miami, Houston. They got to play Seattle, who I think is going to have a really good defense under Mike McDonald. They start the season at the Bengals, significant dogs in that one. So I just wonder if they're going to throw Jacoby Brissett to the Wolves and then bring in Drake Maye maybe around mid-season when they go Tennessee, Chicago, and home to the Rams at that mid-season break. So that would be perhaps my expectation, though it's all trending Maye's direction.
So with all that thought process, Denny, is there a receiver here that is fantasy relevant? I mean, we saw KJ Osborne starting. Jalen Polk only played 2 snaps with the starters. As good of a summer he's had after being a top 40 pick. Is there anybody in this pass game that matters, quite frankly?
Wow, it's a tough question, Connor, because I don't really have a great answer beyond maybe Osborne. He seems to be, maybe the wide receiver 1, which is really an indictment on this team and this roster. I'm not sure about the Jalen Polk usage. It kind of freaked me out last night. They only got 2 plays with the starters. He's a guy who I've been very interested in as a late round receiver, especially if you need receivers late in the draft, someone to plug into like a multiple flex spot roster, that sort of thing. But you have to be wary of that. I guess Hunter Henry, hey, he's still playing, and he could catch a bunch of short dump balls from Brissett or Maye or whatever. But beyond that, it's hard to really mine any fantasy production from this New England roster, I think.
So, Connor, with the skill position players that New England does have, and look, there's no marquee guy there clearly, but there are a lot of guys there between Pop Douglas, Kendrick Bourne when he gets healthy, Hunter Henry. Do you think that Jalen Polk, are there worlds where he can establish himself as wide receiver 1 on this team?
I think he's the most talented. I thought he was the 5th best wide receiver in the draft. I mean, we had the conversation about how good Jalen McMillan has been this summer. Polk took a lot from him last year in the Washington offense that surprised everybody by going to the national title game, right? Playing with the quarterback that was drafted in the top 10. So when I look at Polk, he's somebody that can play inside and outside. He can make all the tough possession catches as well. And when you look at the way they're kind of gravitating, it feels like not, if Drake Maye is going to play this year, it's when is Drake Maye going to play this year. I think it's the same exact thing for Jalen Polk. This is New England. Yes, Bill Belichick is out the door, but they haven't completely lost that identity of, the way the rookies come in and OTAs, they wear weird numbers. You'll have like a corner wearing 59, and they slow play this. And they're going to do that with Drake Maye. They're going to do that to a point with Jalen Polk. But at some point, if you start the season 1-6, like you need to turn the page. What are you getting from having, maybe a KJ Osborne getting 11 targets a game? You need to see what you had. You didn't use, Jalen Polk wasn't the 120th pick in the draft, okay? He was a top 35 pick in the draft. And him and Drake Maye, the good news is, with the way New England does things, they've had reps together this spring, and they've had good reps together. So Jalen Polk, he might not be a thought in September or even October, but Denny, this feels like a New England team that they're just going to want to see what these guys have probably in November and December. And Jalen Polk is that version of their wide receiver room as to what Drake Maye is to the quarterback room.
That's a good point. It could be a lost season by, I don't know, November 1st for the Patriots, and they'll just go from there. Jay mentioned how tough their early season schedule. That's brutal schedule. So it could be a whole half a season with Jalen Polk profiling as the wide receiver 1. We'll see how that goes. I mean, if they win a few games early, that probably is not great for Polk, but we'll see. We have to keep that in mind. So he might be a stash. He might be a stash in deeper leagues. But really right now, I think that you're probably just wanting to target guys in, more high-powered offenses or offenses that might be able to score any points, which I don't know about the Patriots this year.
So not a ton from the Philadelphia side of this game besides Tanner McKee looking quite good, even as the number 3 quarterback for the Eagles. But, Denny, the question the world is wondering this offseason, is the Tush Push still alive in Philly?
Look, we have spent, on the Rotoworld Football Show, we have spent all season analyzing whether Kellen Moore, the new offensive coordinator in Philadelphia, is going to keep the Tush Push the most efficient, unstoppable play in all of football. Okay, with Jalen Hurts, I should say. It is funny when other teams try it with a quarterback who weighs 60 pounds less than Jalen Hurts and can't leg press a tank. Like Hurts can, and then it fails, and they say, "Oh, the Tush Push doesn't work." No, it works with this guy. Okay, so we wonder, is Kellen Moore going to keep that? It appears that they might. I'm leaning toward yes, because last night the Eagles actually ran a Tush Push on 4th and 1. It was disastrous. It was a fumble. Everybody's falling all over each other. It was terrible. But I don't care. That doesn't matter. It's a preseason game. It was the QB3 in there. If Hurts is continuing to do the Tush Push, it means a lot for his fantasy value, and it's very bad for Saquon Barkley. I have some stats to share with the folks here. Last year, Jalen Hurts had 16 rushing attempts inside the 5, 13 touchdowns on those rushes. Only five players had more inside the 5 rushing attempts. DeAndre Swift only had 9 rushing attempts inside the 5. So we're talking about really like chopping out a bunch of touchdowns from Saquon Barkley's fantasy floor here. They also don't really target the running back with Jalen Hurts, with this Jalen Hurts offense. And, I'm very hesitant to take Barkley where he's going, or even if he drops in drafts, honestly.
Jay, as we head into the weekend here, give me one preseason game you're looking forward to and why.
So it's Raiders-Cowboys, and first of all, in that game, the Raiders are 6.5-point favorites, which Antonio Pierce was destined to lead a preseason team that is 6.5-point favorites. For people who don't know, most preseason games, if it's like a 1 or a 2-point favorite because it's a coin flip, but Antonio Pierce, smash mouth football in the preseason. I'm just interested to see Aiden O'Connell, Gardner Minshew, who separates themselves in that battle.
Denny, what do you got your eye on this weekend?
Yeah, I want to see Colts Cardinals. I want to see how the Colts handle their wide receiver rotation with Josh Downs out. Josh Downs might be back for week 1. I kind of doubt it. It was a very serious ankle injury. I want to see how they handle Michael Pittman. I want to see what they do with A.D. Mitchell, with Alec Pierce. That'll be something I'm watching very closely.
For me, guys, I want to see Bryce Young against the Jets because all the early reports this summer of Bryce Young is that things look much more promising, and why that's great, and you'd rather have that than the opposite. I want to see what it's like when the actual lights come on. You have a real pass rush. You're not going to see any advanced coverages, especially what the Jets do during the regular season, but just this is a team that went out and bought an offensive line. They've added weapons at wide receiver, Jay. At some point, we got to see something from Bryce Young, and it starts this weekend.
Absolutely, yeah. Big year for Bryce Young.
All right, guys. Denny, thanks for joining us, filling in for Matthew. Just a lovely job. I wouldn't even call it filling in. I would say just taking the throne and running with it.
It's great to be with you.
We will be back, of course, in studio next Monday. Matthew will be back with us as well as we get you ready for your fantasy drafts. For Denny and Jay, I'm Connor. Have a good weekend.
Okay, you have a chance to win $1 million in the NBC sweepstakes on Yahoo Fantasy. Just download the redesigned Yahoo Fantasy app or go to NBCSports.com/fantasymillion for additional details. What are you waiting for?
Hey, it's Matthew Berry from NBCSports.com and Rotoworld.com, and I want to thank you so much for watching whatever it is you just watched, or if nothing else, being too lazy to click out of the autoplay after this video started, after whatever it is you actually wanted to watch finished. But now that you're here, I'd like to take a moment here to ask you respectfully now, okay? I'm asking you respectfully to subscribe to the NFL on NBC YouTube channel. You'll get the latest Rotoworld fantasy news headlines, all sorts of great shows, including my own Fantasy Football Happy Hour. So go subscribe now. Again, I'm asking respectfully.